Well, my friends, in our first reading today, we heard the story of Samuel and Eli. And you know, the story is almost comical. And that Samuel keeps thinking that Eli is the one calling him, when in truth, it is God who is calling him. But of course, we don't listen to this story just so we can be amused. It is included in this liturgy to get us to consider our own role in cooperating with God's plan for our lives, our own faithfulness to God's call, because God calls each and every one of us. And it all begins with listening, Now, my friends, many of us probably feel we're not incredibly good listeners when it comes to God's voice. When I say we, first and foremost, I include myself. So if listening to God's voice is a difficult challenge, please know that many, many people feel the exact same way. So where do we begin? Well, first of all, we will never hear what God wants us to hear, whether God is whispering or shouting, if we do not expect God to be communicating with us. And to believe that takes faith, deep faith, authentic faith. Do we believe that God has something to say to us personally? That God is trying to move our minds and our hearts down a pathway of goodness and holiness that leads to Him? Or do we believe that God is silent? That we have to figure out everything all by ourselves? You know, how we answer such questions makes all the difference in the world. Because if we do believe God is trying to communicate with us, how then might we be attentive to the voice of God? Well, there are many ways, but let me just mention a few. It all begins with prayer. Not the asking God for a laundry list type of prayer, but the kind of prayer in which we rest our mind, our heart, and our soul in God and allow God to come to us in the silence. Letting our compassionate, loving God speak first before we even utter one single word. And that's vitally important. It's crucial. Another way we can remain attentive is by not dismissing some of the inner conflicts and disconnects we sometimes feel when we're trying to figure something out and making decisions. In other words, if we're choosing something or someone that makes us feel uneasy, makes us wonder if we're really doing the right thing, then the truth is probably we are not. That uneasiness might just be God tapping us on the shoulder. If even only a few people for whom we have much respect give us the same advice, it might be wise not to dismiss their comments, but rather take them to heart. Because God may be using such individuals as His messengers to get to the very core of our being. Or if an appeal by our church or a charity tugs at our heartstrings over and over again, maybe we should take seriously the urging to donate. You know, God sometimes even speaks to us through our fears and through our tears. Hopefully, my friends, you get what I'm trying to say. That listening to God's voice begins with being attentive to whatever is going on within us, inside of us. You know, at first Samuel could not recognize God's voice because he was weary, he was overcome with sleep. Therefore, he was unable to be attentive. My friends, it's also important to listen for God's voice, not just once in a while, but continually. Because that way it becomes a habit, it becomes a good habit. God knows we have enough bad ones. As we act on that voice within again and again, that is when we learn the difference between things of God and things not from God. The difference between things we should pursue and things that will only lead us to heartbreak to loneliness, to selfishness. It is in the practice of listening that we actually get better at it. That is called habituation, not unlike how we acquire virtues, by doing good and holy things and doing them over and over again until they become an integrated quality at the very core of our being. And this one last thing I will mention, this one last thing may be the major reason at times that we struggle to listen to God's voice. And that reason being, maybe we just do not want to listen to what God has to say. Do not want to know what God is asking of us. And that might just be the most honest answer of all. Because deep down, we know what Jesus is going to say. He's going to say, come. Come and you will see. That, my friends, is the heart of the whole matter. What Jesus wants is for us to follow wherever he leads. That's not an easy thing to do because it costs a lot. In fact, it will cost us everything. Do we have the courage to respond positively to the voice of Jesus? Not once in a while, but continually. Now, it sounds scary, maybe even impossible. But in faith, we know that Jesus' way is always the best way. And so, why not try it, my friends? Not tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, but today. Let Jesus come to you in silence. Is something especially important to ask of you, something life-giving to reveal to you. And when you hear his voice, with faith and trust, let your hearts echo the words of Samuel. Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.